This is the live question and answer session of e-lecture obstetric emergencies. My name is Nasir Hussain. I work as a professor of obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Health Sciences, and I am also the in charge of Gynae Unit 2. There are a number of questions which have been forwarded. There are perhaps 22 questions which have been forwarded out of this session, and I'm glad that you guys are thinking about it, whatever is being taught is also I'm able to convey it to you. The first question is, please demonstrate how to do uterine rub in postpartum hemorrhage. Well, this is a practical question. I don't know how to demonstrate it via live session, and currently with the situation where the Professional Development Center is also closed down, otherwise we could have managed it on dummy. So considering there is a woman who is lying and has got has just delivered, the first thing you have to do is to palpate the uterus. So, and once you have palpated the uterus, if you can find out the fundus of the uterus, you have to move it in a rotating direction. Simply just rub the uterus. There is no science involved in it. So if you are alone in your clinic and you have a woman's attendant or your own ayah or someone else, the only thing to do is find out where is the fundus of the uterus. The fundus of the uterus can go missing if the woman is having a inverted uterus, or there is an inversion, or there is a ruptured uterus. Otherwise, you should be able to palpate the uterine fundus, and you just simply need to identify it and rub it. Anybody can do it. There is no rocket science involved in doing a uterine rub in postpartum hemorrhage. The second question is, what is ergometrine and how does it act? Ergometrine is also known as methergine. Nowadays, this drug is not available all over the country. Few places may be having it, and those who are having it are of wet origin, that means used in animals. So most of the time what we are using is oxytocin. So if the drug is not available, there is no point in talking further about it. Question number 3 is, young patient of 21 years recently had miscarriage and got admitted due to some complication, and then she went to sepsis and ultimately died. What will be the possible reason behind this sepsis and her sudden death? Well, this seems to be a theoretical question. The miscarriage, see, a woman has a miscarriage. So if she has remained in the house for good 3 weeks or 4 weeks, considering she is carrying on the pregnancy, only then she can have coagulation failure and other things. Or if the woman underwent instrumentation at some clinic or at some private place or at with the trained birth attendants or any other place, then yes, there are reasons that the woman may undergo sepsis. There are signs and symptoms of the sepsis. So those signs and symptoms of the sepsis, you need to go back and revisit what were the signs of the sepsis, what were the signs of the shock, what are the other features which were there in sepsis. So sepsis cannot lead to sudden death unless there is an embolism associated with sepsis, but this seems a hypothetical question. If the woman has undergone instrumentation, has undergone some other form of intervention, then only she can go, and under unhygienic conditions, then only she can have sepsis. Question number 4 is, what is the mode of delivery in a patient having preeclampsia and low amniotic fluid? So first we need to identify the low amniotic fluid. It is not the low amniotic fluid, it is the decreased amount of amniotic fluid, and the amniotic fluid is not measured as such. There is always an amniotic fluid index where in 4 quadrants you are measuring the amount of the amniotic fluid. So if the amniotic fluid is decreased, the woman is having preeclampsia, The golden rule in obstetrics is if there are two obstetrical complications, please proceed and go ahead with the cesarean delivery. This is the golden rule of obstetrics. If there are two obstetric complications combined together, it's better to go for a safe mode of delivery, which in this case will be a cesarean section. Question number 5 is how to treat placental abruption and placenta previa. These two are two different things. Placental abruption, where the placenta has left its original place, and as a result of which there is a collection of the blood behind the placenta, which may migrate inside the uterine muscle, or it may be coming out through the vagina, so it can be revealed, it can be concealed. It depends on the degree of abruption, and it also depends on the amount of abruption. For example, in mild cases of abruption, where the fetal heart sounds are present, the mode of the delivery, the preferred mode of the delivery is cesarean section in order to save the mother as well as to the baby. Well, if the woman is grand multipara or multiparous, has got a favorable cervix, and you see the amount of abruption, and the abruption is revealed, you may go for a vaginal delivery. It depends on the clinical judgment of the physician who is, and the obstetrician who is treating the woman. So there cannot be a single rule that if the woman is having placental abruption, I should go for a vaginal delivery or I should go for a C-section. It depends on the clinical presentation, and of course you will be taking into account whether the baby is alive or not. The placenta previa, the minor and the major variety. The major variety always end up in C-section. The minor variety can be delivered vaginally depending on the amount of the bleeding. Other obstetrical factors, say for example, if a woman has conceived after 18 years and having minor degree of placenta previa, nobody will like to deliver her vaginally. People will like to give her a safe delivery by doing the C-section. So in obstetrics, there is no absolute thing. You need to take into account the clinical history and the whole scenario and picture. So you just, it's not mathematics, it's not accounting, where you will have one clear-cut answer. What do you mean by shock index and how to so shock index, as we knew, it's a calculation where we divide the heart rate with the systolic blood pressure. This has been used in trauma. This has also been used in postpartum hemorrhage. A shock index of more than 1 indicates how much transfusions you require for your patient. It also indicates that there is some gravity of the situation, and if the shock index is more than 1, you need to be more cautious about how much blood transfusion will be required. The second question which has been attached to the shock index, how to remove remains of placenta in patients with postpartum hemorrhage. Well, if the woman has delivered vaginally, you will be removing the pieces of the placenta vaginally. If you are doing a C-section and you are in the during the procedure, you will remove the remains of the placenta. What is misoprostol and what is its mechanism of action? Misoprostol is basically a drug which has been used for the treatment of peptic ulcer. Then the off-label use has also been found to be in control of postpartum hemorrhage. It's a prostaglandin, it acts upon the prostaglandin receptor, causes the uterine contraction, can be given by an oral route, can be given by the sublingual route, can be given by perrectal route, pervaginal route. It is absorbed through the mucous membrane and it causes decrease in the blood loss, and it also causes uterine contraction. So that is the mechanism of action for misoprostol. Question number 7 is what is secondary PPH and how to manage it. Secondary PPH, there are 2 types of postpartum hemorrhage. The primary postpartum hemorrhage, which you are seeing within 24 hours of the delivery, and secondary PPH is the one which you are seeing at a later stage, and it may include weeks, it may include after 14 days the woman may come with the excessive amount of the bleeding. This may be due to infection. This may be due to retained pieces of products of conception. It needs to be identified what is the reason for secondary PPH and then managed accordingly. What are the doses of hydrazine and labetalol and how to make diluted solution? So I brought an ampule of labetalol with me. The labetalol is available in, this is manufactured by one of the local companies, and it is, this is a 10, this is a, an ampule of 10 milliliters and in each it has got 50 milligram and 10 ml. 50 milligram of labetalol in 10 milliliters. What we give initially is 20 milligram, and we give it slowly over 2 minutes, and then record the blood pressure, what is the blood pressure. If it has decreased, we may not need to repeat it. If it has not decreased, we may need to repeat it. Similarly, hydralazine is available in a strength of 10 milligram, 20 milligram. You need to dilute it and then give it according to the blood pressure, according to the heart rate of the patient, and also if the woman is having no contraindication like asthma for hydralazine. These are the drugs which needs to be given in settings which have the hospital settings. These two drugs need to be given cautiously, and perhaps it's better to avoid in a setting where the facilities are only of an outpatient or clinic facilities. How to manage a multigravida with previous history of abruptio placentae during pregnancy? What advices should we give her, and what are red flags for that patient? See, abruptio placentae is a one-time occurrence, so it's not occurring all the time in every pregnancy. And if it is occurring in every pregnancy, that means we need to rule out certain conditions which may include thrombophilias, which may include both inherited as well as the acquired thrombophilia. Similarly, there may be chronic hypertension with which the woman may be going into repeated abruptio placentae. The red flags will obviously the history. The red flags will obviously be the clinical investigations which happen. The abruptio placentae is usually seen in a woman who have chronic hypertension or who have acute hypertension, who are having any form of trauma, or the woman has severe anemia, or the woman has, as I told you in the beginning, it may be acquired or inherited thrombophilia, which can lead to recurrent abruptio placentae. It depends, but it is not seen very often that a woman is having abruption in each and every pregnancy, unless she has got inherited thrombophilia or she is a case of chronic hypertension. How can we reduce the risk of PPH due to placenta previa in a woman with multiple gestation? What should be the safest mode of the delivery with minimum blood loss for such cases? The placenta previa and PPH go hands in gloves together. If you are suspecting that this woman is having placenta previa, on ultrasound examination, what you just need to do is to identify what is her hemoglobin concentration and then arrange the blood according to it. The guideline says for major placenta previa, you need to have at least a minimum of 4 units of Paxils with you. This is the amount of the blood. If the woman has got a good hemoglobin concentration of 10 gram or 11 gram, she may be able to bear the loss. But if a woman has come to you and has got a hemoglobin concentration of 6 or 4 gram per deciliter, she is a woman who will need a lot of blood transfusions. You can only reduce the risk of postpartum hemorrhage by keeping her hemoglobin at par to 10 gram per deciliter or 11 gram per deciliter in the antenatal period. What are the risk factors that predisposes to uterine rupture, and what is the prognosis of uterine rupture? The calmness factor which is responsible for uterine rupture nowadays is repeated cesarean section, and if the woman is having a short interpregnancy interval, say for example she has delivered last baby 6 months back, so you should be advising them that see, the next pregnancy should not happen for at least next 2 years. and the woman conceives, if she has not been practicing any contraception methods, and she conceives again, there are chances that because of the short IPI, which is interpregnancy interval, the woman may have a uterine rupture. Or if she remains in the labor for a very long time, then also it can lead to uterine rupture. Similarly, if the woman has contraindication for vaginal delivery, and some trained birth attendant or anybody else keeps on giving her injectable oxytocin or other drugs, it may also lead to uterine rupture. The prognosis of the uterine rupture depends whether the rupture is complete or incomplete. If the rupture is complete, say the baby's amniotic fluid has ruptured and it has gone into the peritoneal cavity, the moment the baby goes into the peritoneal cavity and takes a breath, all the things which need not to go into the lungs of the baby will go, and it will simply kill the baby at that very moment. And if the baby preserves in the amniotic fluid, and even if there is a dehiscence of the scar or there is an incomplete rupture, what will happen? The baby is going to make up and is going to survive, depending on how quickly you have identified that there is a uterine rupture. Sometimes it happens that during repeated cesarean section, when you are proceeding for C-section, you see in front of your own eyes that the scar is distant, but the amniotic cavity in which the baby floats is intact, as a result of which you will be able to have a live baby. So it depends how much time has elapsed between the labor pains and the woman seeking medical advice. Question number 12 is, can abruptio placentae cause irreversible damage to the fetus resulting in cerebral palsy? How to minimize adverse effects in fetus in such cases? See, abruptio placentae, if it remains unattended for a very long time. We did a research and found it out that if the amount of the blood loss is less than 300 milliliters or between 300 to 400 milliliters, the baby is going to survive. But if the blood loss because of the abruptio placentae is greater than 500 milliliters, the baby is not going to survive. The baby will have a stillbirth, the woman will have a stillbirth, and the baby will die. So if the baby does not die, and because once the placenta has left its place, that means the vessels which are supplying blood to the baby, they have been sheared away. As a result of which, the blood supply to the fetus will be gone and there will be hypoxia. Once there is hypoxia, it can lead to cerebral anoxia and cerebral palsy. But before that, the baby usually passes away, and what we see is a stillbirth. What is the management of vasa previa due to velamentous insertion of the placenta? What are the chances of the normal delivery without ending up in PPH? So see, these questions are very theoretical. If a woman is having a vasa previa, meaning the vessels of the placenta are seen traversing in the amniotic fluid and it is attached to a secondary lobe, with the dilatation of the cervix, it is going to rupture. Once it ruptures, there will be torrential bleeding. The only thing to do is to have a C-section, otherwise you are going to lose the woman as well as you are going to lose the baby, because the shearing of the placenta will lead to hypoxic injury to the fetus. Question number 14 is, in multigravida known case of hypertension since 5 years taking oral nifedipine, how can we rule out superimposed preeclampsia? So the oral nifedipine is not the drug which is given for chronic hypertension, number one. Number two, they are on some other ACE inhibitors or other drugs. Number two, the woman will be complaining of headache, the woman will have raised blood pressure. She must be knowing what was her blood pressure before the start of the pregnancy. So if her blood pressure had been staying at 160, 100 and now it is moving on to 180, 120, there is superimposed presence of proteinuria as well, then yes, you need to find it out, but that with this hypertension the woman is also having preeclampsia. Remember the definition of preeclampsia, there is also proteinuria along with the raised blood pressure. Question number 15, how to evaluate patient for HELLP syndrome? Please explain its management. Also, how to evaluate a patient for HELLP? HELLP stands for hemolysis, elevated liver enzymes and low platelet count. If you break down these words, HELLP, So you know there is a hemolysis going on, there is with the hemolysis there will be a low elevated liver enzymes. How much they be raised? They may be raised 2 times, they may be raised 3 times. Say for example, if the SGPT normally should be less than 50, it may go to 835. The platelet count will be 46,000. There will be a red blood cell count of 6 or 7 gram per deciliter. What do you need to do? You need to identify what category of HELP it is. Is it category 1, 2, or 3? If the level is more than 100,000, it will be falling in category 1. If it is between 100 to 50,000, it will be category 2. If it's less than 50,000, it will be category 3. The management of HELP is immediate delivery, depending on what is the per vaginal findings. If the woman is dilating, is multigravida, is 6 or 7 centimeter, and has come to you, you will go for vaginal delivery. But if the woman is not in labor or is having all these investigations which are consistent with HELP, it is better to go for a LSCS. What are the blood tests that should be done in cases of preeclampsia after proteins are positive on urine dipstick? Should a confirmatory test be performed? See, the urine dipstick has false positive and false negative rates as well. As a result of which, it is always better to confirm it. The gold standard is also a 24-hour urinary protein, but it is cumbersome in women to collect the 24-hour urine, so it's better to get a urine protein creatinine ratio, which is simple one-time method, needs a specimen, and can be easily done, not very costly. Yes, the positive urine dipstick needs to be confirmed with the help of a confirmatory test. Now, what are the tests which needs to be done for preeclampsia? So you will start with CBC to see what is the platelet count. You will have a liver function test to see if the SGOT, SGPT are raised or the gamma GT is raised. So you will also have a urine detailed report to see whether there is proteinuria or not. And if you are running in a good setup, you can also go for a lactate dehydrogenase level to see whether the levels are more than 400. This will show that the woman is having HELP syndrome. So these were the questions which were forwarded to me for that I need to answer them. I must appreciate those trainees who asked these questions, because that indicated their passion as well as their enthusiasm for learning from this eCast. Wish you all well. This is the end of live question and answer session for e-lecture on obstetric emergencies. Thank you.